Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Agriculture Innovation Center, or AIC, program webinar for applicants. Thank you for joining us today. I would now like to introduce and turn the presentation over to Melinda Martin, the Acting Chief of the Direct Programs Branch in the Rural Business Cooperative Service. Melinda?
Thank you, Taylor. Hello. Welcome to the Applying for an Agriculture Innovation Center grant webinar. We're so glad you decided to join us today. The Agriculture Innovation Center program, also known as the AIC program, was authorized nearly 2 decades ago, but limited funding over the years meant there hasn't been much activity in the program until the past couple of years. We are pleased that we now have increased funding appropriated to this program. The AIC program is part of a suite of programs related to value-added agriculture. The Value-Added Producer Grant Program awards funds directly to ag producers for planning and working capital activities, while the Agricultural Marketing Resource Center provides research and information on value-added agriculture. The AIC program, which we'll be talking about today, makes grants to centers to provide technical assistance to agricultural producers to help them develop and market value-added agricultural products. We do understand that the AIC program has many specific requirements that can seem complex. So we are working to provide clarity so you can put together a successful application. We have prepared this webinar to further explain the program requirements to help you determine if you are going to apply. So with that said, I'm going to turn things over to Gail Tuner, who manages the program. Thank you so much for joining us today and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Melinda. Hi, everyone. My name is Gail Tuner. I am the current program manager for the AIC program. You can find my contact information at the end of the presentation in case you have follow-up questions about this process or the program in general. Honey Turner is also a contact for this program, and her information is at the end of the presentation too. I've got our agenda up on the screen now, so you can see how we'll proceed today. First, I'll give you an overview of the program, including some of the background on how the program started. Once we've covered those basics, I'll talk about what the eligibility requirements are for the program and go through what you need for an application. Then I'll explain how we process applications and make awards. Finally, I'll open up the webinar for your questions. So now let's talk about the program in general. I'm going to go through a little background on the program and then explain what the main purpose of the program is. The AIC program was first authorized in the 2002 Farm Bill. It was set up to provide grants to agriculture innovation centers that would work with agricultural producers to help them develop and market value-added agricultural products. We didn't have the resources to run the program back in 2002, but we did in 2003. So we made 10 awards for about $10 million. After 2003, though, the program lost its funding until 2018. By then, the program had been dormant for so long that we had some legal and policy questions to tackle. Once we resolved those questions, we opened the application period for the program in October of 2019. We selected 3 applicants for funding, and we learned a lot about the challenges of this program and the kinds of questions that our applicants have. So we did make a few adjustments to the language in our Federal Register notice to help answer those questions and provide some clarity on a few issues that came up last year. Hopefully, this webinar will provide useful information to you to help you decide if you want to apply for a grant during the current application period, which closes on September 27th. The way that funds can be used for this program has caused some confusion, and I'll go through the use of funds more specifically later in the presentation. But for now, just remember that centers need to provide services directly to agricultural producers to help them develop and market value-added agricultural products. The program also has some important thresholds to be aware of. There is a minimum of $400,000 on the awards, and the statute sets a maximum of $1 million. The grant award can cover up to 2/3 of project costs. Remember that project costs include both federal and matching funds. So what that means is that a grant can pay for 2/3 of the project and matching funds must cover the other third. So if a recipient got a $1 million grant, they would have to provide $500,000 in matching funds. We also set a 2-year period of performance for new centers because our experience back in 2003 was that centers had a big learning curve and a lot of hoops to jump through to get started on their projects. So now that we have a general idea of what the program does, let's talk about what the eligibility requirements are. In terms of what types of organizations are eligible for the program, basically all types are eligible. The only restriction that we have is that individuals cannot apply. So that means nonprofit organizations, for-profit or commercial organizations, institutions of higher education, state governments, local governments, and federally recognized Indian tribes are all eligible organizations. The AIC program does have a matching funds requirement for 1/3 of the project cost. And I know I just talked about that a couple slides ago, but it's a requirement that has caused some confusion. So I want to make sure that we're really clear. So remember that the project cost is the sum of grant funds and matching funds. So like I said before, if you wanted to request a $1 million grant award, you would need to provide at least $500,000 in matching funds. Those matching funds can come from a variety of sources, including the applicant's cash reserves and third parties. One important consideration when you are looking at using matching funds from a third party is how the funds can be used. For example, if you are planning to use a state grant as match, you need to make sure that the grant can be used for allowable purposes for the AIC program. Another consideration is making sure that if the funds are in-kind services from a third party, that you have a good method of valuing those services. The requirements for the center's governance are probably the most challenging for applicants to meet, so it is worth spending some time talking about them. The first thing is that the center needs to have independent governance. What does that mean exactly? Well, the center can still be a subsidiary or some other kind of subordinate organization of the applicant organization, but the center needs to have a separate board of directors, control over its personnel decisions, including hiring and firing employees and contractors, the ability to set policies and procedures, including personnel and procurement, the ability to develop and approve its budget, and to select its own board of directors. The second thing is that the center needs to have a board of directors with a certain composition. The program statute dictates which organizations must be represented on the board. The members must include representatives from the following organizations: the General Agricultural Organization with the most members in your state, the General Agricultural Organization with the second most members in your state, the State Department of Agriculture, or a state legislator, plus representatives from 4 agricultural commodity organizations. For the first 2 representatives, how do you figure out who the top 2 general agricultural organizations are in your state? Well, the first one is most likely to be your state's Farm Bureau. After that, you'll have to do some research. The USDA does not maintain a database of organizations or track by state because membership numbers can change from year to year. So your Farm Bureau may know. You can check with your State Department of Agriculture or a land-grant university. Another option is to use Google and simply search and find out how many members each organization has. One big issue that we discovered last year is that some state departments of agriculture may think it is a conflict of interest to have a representative on a center's board. So that is an important point to check out before you get commitment from your State Department of Agriculture. State legislators may have a similar issue based on what committees or legislation they are working on. One way to check to see if there is a conflict of interest is to have the state legislator speak with their council or ethics committee. Finally, you need to get 4 representatives from different commodity organizations that have representation in your state. These organizations must be representing agricultural commodities, not end products. Good types of organizations to look for are ones that represent producers or growers, although there are some state marketing boards that might work too. Another eligibility requirement that can be hard to meet, especially for organizations that are new to providing assistance to agricultural producers, is being able to show existing capability to provide services. Either the applicant organization must have the experience to provide the services, or there need to be at least 2 key personnel that have that experience. And it is important to remember that the experience must be the same type of experience as what you are proposing in your application. So if you want to provide financial services and organizational services, either your organization or your key personnel must have at least 3 years of experience providing those types of services to agricultural producers. Another requirement is to show that your project has the support of the agricultural community. The way we determine that is to look at 3 letters of support. The organizations that are providing the support need to have a primary mission of supporting agriculture. They need to be based in the state or region that your project will serve, and they need to serve the same group of producers that are targeted by your project. What we found last year is that there was some confusion about this support, and we saw letters coming in from general economic development organizations. So it is important that you consider the organizations that are going to be providing the support. It should be clear either from the name of the organization or in the body of the letter that the organization supports agriculture. There should also be enough information in the letter that we can figure out where the organization is based and what kind of producers they work with. For example, it wouldn't make sense for you to get support from an organization that works with hemp producers if you aren't planning on doing any work with hemp producers. Instead, you would want support from organizations that have some kind of connection to your project. You need to make sure that your project has a clear focus on helping agricultural producers develop and market value-added agricultural products. So that means being clear in your application and providing descriptions of services that use words like agricultural producers and value-added agricultural products. A problem that several applicants had last year is that they were too general in their descriptions of their services. So they were describing general business development services, but didn't indicate any focus on value added, or they weren't clear that they would be working with ag producers. You need to remember that while general services can be very helpful, an Ag Innovation Center's job is to focus specifically on working with ag producers to develop and market value-added products. So all the services that are provided need to be provided with that goal in mind, even if it could turn out that a producer opts not to market a product after receiving the service. One significant change that I want to highlight is the use of funds. Last year, we didn't realize that we had an additional restriction on our use of funds for this program, so it wasn't highlighted in our Federal Register notice. This year, though, we want to make sure it is clear. What happened is that the 2018 Farm Bill included some language that restricts the AIC program from duplicating any uses of funds from LAMP programs. LAMP stands for Local Agricultural Marketing Programs. These programs include a couple run by the Agricultural Marketing Service, the Farmers Market Promotion Program, and the Local Foods Promotion Program, as well as our own Value-Added Producer Grant Program. The AMS programs focus on joint marketing efforts like farmers markets, CSAs, and food hubs, while the VAPG program focuses on providing planning and working capital grants for marketing value-added products. So that means a lot of the services that centers provide cannot be provided to joint marketing efforts, and also that centers cannot do feasibility studies, business plans, and marketing plans for producers, with one exception, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. So centers can provide this list of services here on the slide. Financial advisory services, as long as they aren't to joint marketing efforts, process development services, Those would be things like scale production assessments or process improvement, organizational assistance, outreach assistance. And what we're talking about here when we say outreach is really something along the lines of networking and connecting or matchmaking. I think those are terms that are often used. So you'd be looking at connecting producers to distribution systems, processing facilities, and commercial kitchens. Product development with the exception of recipe development, because recipe development is considered R&D, research and development, and we'll talk about that restriction a little bit more later. You can use the funds for establishing and operating the center, as well as for making mini grants of $5,000 or less to agricultural producers. One thing I want to highlight about these mini grants is that they have to be provided for the same types of services that a center could provide, and the matching funds requirement carries through. So that means if a producer is getting a $5,000 mini grant, they need to provide at least $2,500 in matching funds. And the center needs to go through the same process to make sure that these make these awards that a federal agency would. So that means a public notice requesting applications as well as a merit review process. And then the awards need to be monitored just like a federal award, including all of the paperwork and reporting. So the exception that I mentioned in the last slide has to do with feasibility studies, business plans, and marketing plans. While the centers can't use grant funds to do those things, the agency has determined they can use their matching funds to provide those types of services. So if you really want to do those and feel that they're beneficial for your project, you can, as long as you find a way in your budget to be able to link those services exclusively to your matching funds. So I also want to talk about some of the restrictions on the use of funds. There is a pretty lengthy list in the Federal Register notice that I encourage you to take a look at, but on this slide are some of the restrictions that we tend to see a lot of applicants ask about or include in their applications. So no funds can be spent on construction for the purchase of equipment or vehicles. You can't engage in any lobbying activities. You can't buy real property. As I mentioned before, you cannot use funds for research and development, R&D. You can't use funds for anything that appears to be or is an actual conflict of interest. And then in particular, I want to highlight production expenses and processing expenses. Those are two categories that last year's applicants really tried to put in their applications a lot. So I want to make sure you understand that the grant funds can't be used to engage in those kind or to pay for those kinds of expenses. So production expenses have to do with growing the commodity. Processing expenses would have to do with the processing or manufacture of the value-added product. And I also want to remind you of these restrictions. You need to make sure that your funding request falls within the minimum and maximum award amount, which this year the minimum is $400,000 and the maximum is $1 million. Your center needs to propose providing assistance to more than one producer. The goal is to have the centers providing services to lots of producers. The center can't earn revenue from processing or selling the product that is developed and marketed. That doesn't preclude you from charging fees for your services. The other thing I want to mention is you have to provide your services directly to agricultural producers. So that means you can't provide services to any other entities. So that would be people or entities like distributors or service providers or processors or other kinds of sort of middlemen in the value-added process. And finally, I wanted to remind you that if your budget includes more than 10% of funds allocated for unallowable costs, we will consider your application ineligible for assistance. So with this particular restriction, what we're trying to do is give you just a little bit of flexibility and room in your application if you make a mistake, but it's important to pay attention to the use of funds restrictions. Now that I've covered most of the bigger eligibility requirements, I want to run through a few of the other requirements on this slide. So you can apply for a maximum of 2 years for your period of performance. That means the time period that your project is active. and I really recommend that you take the full 2 years in your proposal. We have found that centers need time to get up and running and start promoting their services. If you've had other federal awards, we will check to make sure you have had satisfactory performance on those awards, which means things like submitting reports on time, performing according to your approved scope of work, and using funds for allowable purposes. We will also assess your financial capability by looking at your current ratio and cash on hand. And this is probably obvious, but your application needs to be complete. If you are missing something, we won't come back to you and ask for it. You can't duplicate services that you are currently providing. So that means you need to focus on providing your services to new customers or adding new services to your existing client base. And if you are, your organization is limited to submitting only one application, and if you are expecting to contract with another center that you know is applying for this program, you need to limit your contract to 10% or less of your total budget. Okay, so now that we've covered the eligibility requirements, let's talk about what you need for your application. It's important to remember that the information in your application accomplishes two things. First, it gives us the information we need to assess your eligibility. Second, it gives us the information we need to assess the merit of your application relative to what other applications are proposing to do based on our scoring criteria. Okay, so the first thing to know is where you can find the application requirements. You need to have a copy of the Federal Register notice that we published on June 28th, 2021. You can find a copy of this notice in 3 different places, and I'm going to take the time right now to kind of walk you through how you can access it. So one of the places you can go, if I can pull it up here on my screen, maybe, and click here. So one of the places is straight from the source, which is at the federalregister.gov. And if you go over to sort of the right top right corner, you'll have a search feature here. You can use the name of the program. I like to use the CFDA number because it's a little shorter and faster, 10.377. And that's going to give you a list. So you see the date on this one here is 6/28/2021. So we know this is the right one. So we click on that link. And then it'll give you a little summary here. And if you want to see the text of the notice, you can click on this PDF right here. And the PDF looks like this. And so it's just paginated. Everything is just printed in order. So this page is going to have something else on it from another agency. But if you scroll down, you can see our notice starts here towards the bottom of the second column there. So that's one way you can get to it. Another way, I'm going to see if we can get to our grants.gov. So grants.gov is another place that you can go. And here, again, you can search in a variety of different ways. So we can try Agriculture Innovation Center. I spelled it wrong. We'll see if we still get it. We did. So there you go. RBCS-AIC-2021 is the current notice. And so this will pull up the synopsis for you. And there's 2 other things I think you should probably be aware of. One is the related documents, and this is where you can find the Federal Register notice here. You'll also see a checklist and a template. I'm going to talk about those a little bit more in a minute as soon as I show you the other place to go. So the other place to find the notice is on our program website, which you can get through USDA's Rural Development page. And there's, if you can see where my cursor is here, Programs and Services, you can click there and it'll give you a comprehensive list of our programs, or you can just do a program search on Google. And that'll give you our program website, which you should probably already be familiar with since you registered for our webinar. But you can see this third little tab or bullet here, Federal Register Notice. That will take you and get you a copy of what we just saw from the Federal Register. So now I'm gonna head back here. to our program website. All right, so then I wanted to go and talk to you about the application checklist. And this is available on both our program website, and it was also on the grants.gov page. And you see that here under related documents. And so this is a checklist that we've created to help you make sure you get your applications complete. I will say it's not a substitute for reading the Federal Register notice. Please read the Federal Register notice. And I want to draw your attention to how we have it set up. So the first column is just the item that you need for your application. The second column here is pretty useful because I'll show you in our template in just a minute, but our template is set up in a little bit different order than the Federal Register notice requirements are. And that's mostly because we sort of have an established way of publishing things in the Federal Register, and federal agencies are good at sticking to a tradition. But when we looked at how the application came in, it seemed to make more sense to have things in a little bit different order, both for us to streamline our review process, but also for you when you're grouping your content. So this middle column here shows you what section you should go to in the notice if you're interested in learning more about that item. And then the second line shows you where that is located in the template. And then the third column just has some notes. It might be just making sure you remember something. It might be just a tip on how to fill something out. It might be just a reminder to not forget something, so you can pay attention to that too. Then we have our template. This is set up as a Word document. You are not required to use the template, it's optional, but I encourage you to either use the template or something similar to it because your application will be easier for us to review that way. And also it can help you make sure that you are providing the information that we're looking for without providing extra stuff or without forgetting things. Again, you still need to read the Federal Register notice, but you can see we have things set up here. In particular, I want to alert you to the table of contents, which is set up so you can click on each item in the table of contents and the document will take you to that page. The other thing is when you're sort of done or you're at an intermediate part of updating the template, you can go to this update table and that will update the pagination for your document. So the page numbers will update. So that's kind of an automated feature to help keep your document organized. And you can see that we have a lot of what I call the meat of the proposal at the front. And then we have a lot of appendices at the end with sort of the extra form certifications and other kinds of eligibility documents that aren't necessarily part of the scoring part of your document. So I just wanted to kind of give you a brief orientation there, and we'll come back to the template a little bit on and off through the presentation. All right, so the requirements. What we have here, I'm going to go ahead and move something around on my screen so I can see what I'm doing. So what we have here is starting a list of requirements. So the SF-424 and the SF-424A should be forms that are familiar to any of you who have applied to federal programs before. They're the basic application and budget forms, and you will find those on the grants.gov website. And so I'm going to take you over to where you can find them. Under this package tab, you can see that that will give you this just sort of package here. I'm not sure why it's called that exactly, but if you click the preview button, that will pull up this pop-up window and it will show you that you have these two forms here to fill out. And these are called mandatory forms because they're required to be submitted with your application. The system will actually not allow you to submit an application without these forms. So that's why they're called mandatory. And particularly with the SF-424, the system will help you figure out if you've missed information that you need to go back and fill in before you can submit an application. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. Then we have a couple of certifications. These certifications are in the template. So if we go to the template, oops, I scrolled down just a little bit. Oops, sorry guys. I've got a lot of little windows on my screen that you can't see that are kind of making it hard for me to navigate my screen quite as easily. But here's so Appendix C and Appendix D. And if we go ahead and move to those, You can see that we just have language in the template. All you have to do is click here to enter your organization's name, and you've got that certification complete. And then if we scroll down to Appendix D, you can see that we have our certification on lobbying. And you just need to kind of fill out down here with the name of your applicant organization, your authorized representative, a signature, and a date. I will say, if you decide you would not like to use the template, you can just copy and paste this language into your own application and use it that way. All right, and so the next thing I want to talk about is the audit. Last year we had quite a few applicants who, because of the nature of the type of organization their audits were available on a public website. And so they provided a link to the audit instead of the audit itself. And what we found is that sometimes the links didn't work. There was some kind of mistake in the application, or sometimes when links would get converted from Word to PDF, they would get disjointed. Sometimes websites were down for maintenance or were getting reorganized, and so the links didn't work. Or sometimes, I think one time it happened that the size of the file was so large that our system couldn't handle downloading it. Or it's enough to handle a quarterly sort of amount of your budget. And we really didn't find that too many applicants had trouble meeting those requirements, but you do want to double check those things before you submit your application. And we actually have a place in the application for you to do that. So Appendix E actually has a place for you to calculate your current ratio, which is your current assets divided by your current liabilities. So you can type this in here, make sure you can check it yourself. And then you want to insert the amount of cash on hand at the end of your fiscal year, and you can compare it to one of the quarterly breakdowns that you have in your SF 424A form, just to double check. Okay, and then applicant eligibility. I know I just told you that all kinds of organizations are eligible, but one thing we have to figure out is whether the organization is actually a legal entity. And so even if you are Harvard University, you need to give us the information that we're asking for. And I'm just going to pop over to the Federal Register to see if I can kind of show you what we're looking for. And forgive me for kind of scrolling fast through the screen. It's towards the end of the notice here. And so we're going to scroll down to get to the section that talks about the different things that we need here. And I think it is F. So right here, paragraph F, which is kind of, I guess it's on page 5, towards the bottom of the first column. This is where we tell you, based on the type of entity that you are, what information you need to give us. So public bodies must provide their legal citation that authorizes their organization. Public bodies are state governments, local governments, and federally recognized Indian tribes. Then we have nonprofit and for-profit corporations submitting their state certificate of good standing and articles of incorporation. Institutions of higher education. I gotta scroll back up to the top of the page here, maybe. If I can get all my little arrows to work right here. All right, so here we go. So this is where the most common way to demonstrate this qualification is to provide the legal citation that authorizes the institution. So your state governing body, or you should have a charter or something like that. That's what we're looking for there. So please make sure that you provide that. All right, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna get a drink of coffee here so my throat doesn't lose it. Okay, so here are some more requirements. We've got the verification of matching funds. So we need you to make sure that you verify your matching funds no matter who's providing. There is a form for you to use in the template. We're gonna scroll down here and I'll show you the form. Okay, so this is something that everybody needs to fill out. If you're not using this template, you can copy and paste this into your application, or you can put together something similar. But essentially, this is where you're going to want to list all the different sources of your funds, the amounts, and what they can be used for. You're going to have your totals and that sort of thing. And one thing I want to highlight is if the funds are being provided by a third party, you need a letter signed by an authorized representative of that third party. That includes those things, the amount, use of funds, time period of availability, and you would attach that as a separate file to your grants.gov submission. So just make sure that you're aware that if you're just providing the funds from your own cash reserves, then you just need this letter. But if you have one or more third parties, then you need to have the verification done by the third parties and attach that as well. All right, you need to tell us about the governance of your center. And so this means you need to describe how your center is going to work, essentially. So what role will your board of directors play? How often will they meet? Will you have anyone on the board of directors that's in addition to the required members? What role does the board of directors make in decision-making processes, like for personnel or for procurement or for the budget? This is where you describe all of those things. And I will say, if you say that your board of directors is going to be advisory, that will automatically make you not eligible for the program. So please think carefully. If all you can produce is an advisory board, this program is probably not a good fit for you. If your board is currently advisory, then you need to think about the changes you would make to make the board be independent. As for the board of directors itself, that means telling us who the representative from each organization is going to be and providing a written commitment from that person. So one problem that we saw a lot of last year was that the organization would provide a letter of commitment saying, yes, we're going to provide somebody at some point to be a representative on the board. So that isn't what we're looking for. If the representative is going to be Scott Smith from ABC Commodity Organization, we need a letter from Scott Smith saying, I, Scott Smith, am going to be a representative on this board. I'm representing this organization and I am available to do that. Then if you get an award, we'll work with you a little bit more on the commitment process, and we'll get commitments from the organization and things like that. But for now, we just want to make sure that the person is available. Then you've also got to provide a description of your existing capability to provide services, which we talked about a lot in the eligibility section, which has to do with making sure you, as the applicant organization, or at least 2 of your key personnel, have at least 3 years of experience providing the services that you're proposing to provide. You want to include at least 3 letters of support from the agricultural community, which would be those ag organizations that we talked about earlier. And finally, you want to talk about strategic coordination and alliances. And this is one that I also want to take a minute on because it caused some confusion. This is not a section where you say, we think sometime in the future we might want to coordinate with some organizations, or we have some ideas. This is the section where you flesh out the kind of coordination and alliances that you either have formed already or that you are committed to forming as part of the success of your project. So this is where you talk about if you're going to refer clients from your center to another partner organization to provide services that you can't provide. Or maybe another organization is going to act as a referral to your center. You may have other alliances in place that help you provide services or network or matchmake with producers and distributors, things like that. So all of those things should be well thought about when you submit your application, and we are expecting to see you identify specific organizations by name and identify specific roles of those organizations in your project. All right, let's move on to what I sort of think of as the meat of the proposal. So this is the section of the application that we've grouped together in the template to kind of make it easier for our reviewers to evaluate your project. So here's where we see the title page, table of contents, executive summary, goals, work plan, budget justification, and scoring criteria. And I'm just going to go ahead and advance to the next slide just to kind of run through quickly what the scoring criteria are. And then I'm going to show you just a little bit in the template some things I want you to be aware of. So for scoring criteria, we've got 6: ability to deliver successful track record, work plan and budget, qualifications of key personnel, local support, and future support. So now I'd like to go and show you a little bit in the template what we're going to be looking for to kind of help orient yourself. So you already saw, I showed you the title page where it's just a lot of clicking and entering your name and street address and things like that, just to kind of set it up formally as a proposal. And then we have the table of contents that can be updated based on what you enter. And then, oops, I went squeaking on past it. The executive summary. So again, this is just the way the template is set up is you just click in the box and start typing. And as you go through the template, you'll start to notice that we don't just have a goals of the project section. We have it broken down. There are two things you have to provide as part of this section based on the language in the Federal Register notice. One is a listing of producer services, and the other is a goal related to increasing and improving the ability of local agricultural producers to develop a market or process for value-added agricultural commodities or products. So you need to enter at least one goal there, and that helps you meet the eligibility requirement. If you have other goals, we have a space for that too. But I want to kind of draw your attention to sort of the little helps that we're giving you in this template. So even if you choose not to use the template as the actual submission for your application, it's still a useful document to help you make sure that you're addressing things completely. And I want to give you another example. Like for the scoring criteria, there's actually 4 components to the one criterion. So ability to deliver, we score on 4 different things. One is the center's unique abilities to deliver producer services. Another is the expected sustainability of the value-added ventures that will be supported by the project. A third thing is the transferability of the center's abilities. So can the process that the center comes up with be transferred to another geographic area or another center? Or can it be transferred to a different commodity? And then finally, we have this plans to accomplish work section, and this kind of throws people off. So we tried to put in some language here to help you. So what we're recommending is that you link the services you will provide to your project goals that you listed above and explain how the results of the project will be measurable and attainable during the proposed project period. So this is where we're really asking you to be realistic about what you can accomplish. And please know that our reviewers are going to be experienced, so they will identify projects that seem to be overreaching, and it will make it harder for you to accomplish your project if you try and do too much. We're not necessarily going to be impressed with projects that sort of really try and bring a lot in, because we know how complicated this program can be for centers to get up and running. So we encourage you to be realistic there. So anyway, most of the application has things like this. Like for the successful track record, we're not even asking you for a narrative. It's simply filling out a chart briefly with this information. And you don't have to fill the whole chart. You can just fill it with what you think is the most relevant information, delete the rows you don't need, or you can add additional rows if you need them. And so the entire application has these sort of breakdowns here where we try to give you clues to help you do a better job putting together your application. All right, so now that we've kind of covered that, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about application processing. So this is the part of the process after you submit your application. So what happens after your application is submitted through grants.gov? Well, if your application was filled out correctly and you provided all the mandatory forms and you filled out all the places in the forms that you were supposed to fill out, your SAM.gov registration was up to date, your authorized representative was current in the system, used correct username and password, had the workspace set up correctly, everything was good, you'll get an automated receipt from grants.gov when you submit your application. That does not mean that we have your application just yet. We don't have the ability to see anything in grants.gov until you submit an application for our program. And then we have to manually go in and access it and unzip it and download it and read it. So I'm guessing up to 2 weeks is what we'll need after the application deadline to sort of pull everyone's applications. Depends a little on how many we receive. If we only get, 10 applications, we can do it pretty quickly, but if we get 100, it's going to take a while. So what we do is we actually individually send out an email to each applicant once we have unzipped and downloaded and done what we need to do. We have your application in our system that we can review and look at. And so look for that email from us. And I know that it's hard to wait, but definitely give us a couple weeks. And if you haven't heard from us a couple weeks after you've submitted your application, definitely feel free to get in touch and say, hey, did you guys get my application? We can check. So one thing I did kind of want to touch on here too is if you're having trouble in grants.gov when you are submitting your application, we can't help you. If you have program questions like, is this eligible? Is this an allowable cost? Am I meeting the requirement? We can help you with those, but we can't help you with technical difficulties on grants.gov. So I did just want to take a minute here. It actually took me a second to figure it out myself, so I wanted to show you. If you're having trouble and getting error messages and things like that, if you go to the grants.gov, just the homepage, they have a tab here for applicants. And I found it easy to go down to this bullet here at the bottom of applicant resources that says encountering error messages. Click on that. And then what you see here is a phone number and email for the grants.gov support center. That is who you should contact if you have any issues at all with the technical submission of your application. And I also want to encourage you to make sure that your authorized representative or user has gone into grants.gov, located the announcement, they're aware of the package, they've pulled up the forms, they see the template and that sort of thing, that their user ID and password is known and up to date. Check your SAM.gov registration, because if that has expired, grants.gov will reject your application. Just go through and check those technical things soon, so that if you have a problem, you can go to grants.gov technical support and get what you need without having to be kind of nervous and anxious at the last minute. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. So once we have your application and we've acknowledged the receipt, then we put your application into a review for eligibility. And that's where we check it for all the things that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So we're looking at your financial capability, your experience, and all those different things, particularly your board of directors. And then once we complete that eligibility review, if we determine that your application is eligible, we're going to send it to our reviewers who are going to evaluate it for merit based on the scoring criteria. So those reviewers are going to take a look at all the applications that are eligible. They're going to score each of the individual criterion, and then we're going to have total scores for the applications. And we're going to select applications for funding in rank order. And so what can happen is we might end up with a situation where maybe we funded 8 applications and we have $500,000 left in our funds available, but the next ranked application requested $600,000. So we might go to that applicant and say, do you think you could do your project for $500,000? And if they say yes, then we would make that selection and say, all right, you can go ahead and we will offer you an award. Sometimes it doesn't work. We might have $300,000 left and the next ranked applicant wants $1 million. And in that case, we would just keep our $300,000 and roll it over into the next year's program. So I just kind of want to give you some insight on how that works. The other thing I wanted to make sure you're aware of is we do have a minimum score on applications this year. So you need to score at least 40 points out of the 85, I think it is, that are available in order to be able to be selected for funding, even if your application is eligible. So just be aware of that. Once we have selected these applications for funding, we send out written notifications to those applicants, and we also send out written notifications to unsuccessful applicants and explain why the application wasn't selected. It might be an eligibility issue, it could be a scoring thing where it just didn't rank high enough to be funded, or maybe it fell below the minimum score. And so that letter to unsuccessful applicants will explain exactly what we found, and then it will also offer some dispute resolution alternatives in the event that the applicant doesn't agree with what the agency decided. However, even if you get the letter and you're like, yeah, I can see why the agency said that. I can see I didn't meet that requirement, or I didn't score high enough to be funded. You can still set up a time to talk with us, and we will go through your application and try and help you sort of figure out ways for improvement if that's what you want to do. All right, so let's say you are a successful applicant. What happens now with the award process? So the award process starts when we issue what we call a letter of conditions. And that letter identifies all the conditions you need to meet in order to be approved for an award. And so the conditions will, a lot of times, are just going to be forms for you to sign that, you know, say you'll have a drug-free workplace, or you won't engage in lobbying. We'll ask for resumes from your key personnel. We'll ask for some additional verification for your board of directors. There may be cases where we had minor questions about your work plan and budget that we want you to resolve for us, or we might have identified some unallowable costs we'd like you to remove. And so those will all be conditions of the award. You usually get 60 to 90 days to meet the conditions of the award. And then after you've met them, we issue a grant agreement. And once you and the agency have signed that grant agreement, your award is considered approved and you can start your project. Okay, so I just went through a lot of information in a short amount of time. So the next thing, I guess, is to open things up for questions.
The first question is in regards to the center having a separate governance. For an example, if the center, sorry, I lost my spot. If the center is hosted as a higher education institution, can those policies and process, for example, procurement, be passed down, or does the center have to create all of their own? And follow-up to that is, does it have to be a voting board, or will an advisory board be sufficient?
Okay, so that's a great question. If the center is hosted at a higher education institution, then the board can actually adopt the policies and procedures of the university. And I would really encourage that as a best practice, to be honest, because universities have usually spent a lot of time finalizing their policies and procedures and making sure they're in accordance with any federal guidelines. So that's a great way to approach it. And the other thing I'm going to address right now, even though it wasn't part of this question, but it comes up a lot, is what if the center wants to fire a university employee? So this would be, a lot of universities will contribute part or all of the time of one or more of their staff to the project. And it may come to a point where the center realizes they don't need that person anymore. Not necessarily a firing situation, but just maybe the services that they thought they wanted to provide with that person aren't really being utilized very much, and they realize that the demand isn't there. So that university staff needs to return back to the university. So the center, the board will say, you know what, we don't need this person anymore. They are off the center's staff. So that it's not that the university's employee has been fired from the university. They simply return to the university in whatever role that the university wants them to be in. So if they are a tenured professor, they return to their tenured professor position and continue their duties there. So it's not that we expect the center to be able to fire tenured professors or university staff. And so, but I will say there may be times when a center might want to deviate from the policies and procedure of a university. And I don't really have a great example, but it may have to do with procurement policies or something else where maybe they need to be a little bit more flexible because of the small budget that they have compared to the university or something like that. So they may be able to create their own nuances to their policies and procedures. And so then to answer the next part of that question, does it have to be a voting board or will an advisory board be sufficient? An advisory board is not sufficient. It must be a voting board. They must have control over the center's operations, with the exception that the center cannot just do whatever it wants. So there's going to be an approved grant agreement in place with an approved work plan and budget, and it is expected that the center will follow that. However, recipients do have some flexibility with respect to their budgets. So they might want to move money from one line item to another line item, again, to address different service needs than what was anticipated at the time of application. So one good example of that would be if you have, say, $100,000 in your salaries and wages category and you have $500,000 in your contracts category, because you're thinking we're going to need a contract out for a lot of this work because we don't have the expertise here. And then you get into the project and you realize, you know what, the services that producers want, really we do have the expertise. So we can bring in another person to hire at the center and we don't need a contract out as much. And so that's an example of where the center's board could make a decision that would still be compliant with the terms of the award, but give them some independence. All right, so that's my super long answer to that question.
Thanks, Gail. We have, this is kind of a several part question, so I'll ask the whole thing and then maybe just go back to have you address each one. The first question is, what if we are the center? We are a small business that creates equipment for hemp producers to make hemp infusions. We also process biomass for those farmers who can't afford to buy our equipment outright. Do we still qualify to apply for the grant?
Sure, so that's a great question. If you apply for a grant to continue doing what you're doing as a small business to make equipment and process biomass, you wouldn't be eligible because those aren't allowable activities. However, if you were going to add a function to your business where you would be providing the services and you can meet all of the other eligibility requirements, like for the board of directors, which, you know, is not, I don't say that lightly, that's a big commitment. So a for-profit organization or business is eligible to apply, but you need to remember that you can't earn revenue off of any of the products. You can't charge production expenses or processing expenses. You really are providing technical services to producers, and you need to have that expertise. And so if you've been making equipment and processing biomass, you don't currently have the expertise on your staff. So you would need to find key personnel who would have that expertise in order to meet that requirement. So certainly you're welcome to get in touch with me after the webinar if you want to have follow-up questions about that and how you can make that work. But I think that's good for now.
Okay, great. And then there were a couple follow-up questions that I'll just ask them, and if you want to table it to speak with the person directly after the fact. Like, while we cannot buy the equipment, we fabricate equipment. Can funds be used for this? And how about receiving revenue for processing? Can we charge a fee for farmers who ask us to process their biomass? I believe you addressed those, but just want to provide another synopsis.
I have, but I'll go through them again because this is definitely complex information. So no, you cannot use any of the grant or matching funds to fabricate equipment. This really is for providing services and technical assistance type things rather than producing equipment. And the other thing, I think the question was, can we charge a fee to process biomass? And the answer to this is no. You can charge fees to provide services. So if you, as an example, if you're providing financial advisory services to a producer who is currently farming and they have a commodity that they'd like to add value to, but they're not quite sure how to take their business to the next level, and they need help figuring out how to set up spreadsheets or how to track their costs, you could provide that service, and you could charge a fee to provide that service. But you cannot make money off of processing a value-added product.
Thank you. All right, and the next question is, does this require application for subcontracting, or as an individual private entity. Reason being is we are currently having an RFA based on a joint scope of work with other stakeholders. For this particular intervention, we see ourselves as the ones who are interested.
So you need to find a way to have one lead applicant. That's the organization that applies, and that's the applicant that, or the organization that takes fiscal responsibility, compliance responsibility for an award. But there can be other collaborators and partners that may receive money through subcontracts or other kinds of partnership agreements. So anyway, if that's something that you are interested in, I do encourage you to get in touch with me and we can kind of talk about the details of how that would work. But definitely it's possible for a group of collaborators to come into the program as long as there is one organization designated as the applicant.
Thanks so much, Gail. And yeah, I don't know if you want to go ahead and advance to the slides so people can grab your contact information. I don't see any other questions in the chat at this time, but we'll certainly give you a few moments to, if you have questions, to do so. Oh, and once again, we can't hear you. I'm not sure why.
Okay, can you hear me now, Taylor?
Great, yes, we sure can. And we did get a question while you were dialing in.
Oh, awesome. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and handle that before we finish up then.
Okay, yes. The question is, I would like to understand the development of a board of directors for an existing nonprofit that already has a board. Would the center be a separate entity from the nonprofit? And would the existing staff of the nonprofit with the knowledge and expertise to be able to work with the center?
Okay, yeah, so that is not an uncommon situation. So essentially what the nonprofit would probably want to do, you could always change your board, but that would probably not make a lot of sense. So you would create a center as a subsidiary organization within your nonprofit, and that subsidiary would have its own separate board that meets the requirements for the program. And then I think, let's see, I'm looking at the question here. So we've talked about that the center needs to be a subsidiary of the nonprofit with its own board. And the next part of the question, would the existing staff of the nonprofit with the knowledge and expertise be able to work at the center? The answer to that is yes. This would be similar to the university situation that I mentioned earlier, where employees of the nonprofit would sort of have a portion or all of their time dedicated to the center to accomplish the tasks of the center. So we would, so that you could definitely do that. And it would be, again, the case of the board perhaps adopting the policies and procedures of the nonprofit organization to the extent that's reasonable. And then if the nonprofit staff are no longer needed for the work of the center, then they would go back to the main sort of nonprofit umbrella organization and continue their work at the nonprofit. And so that's good there. It looks like we've got a few more questions coming in, Taylor, so let's go ahead and handle those.
Sounds great. The next is, how many awards have been given and who or what was the program, their program?
Oh, okay. So in recent years, we've only had one sort of funding cycle, which was 2020. We made 3 awards as a result of that cycle. And if you want to get in touch with me, my email is going to be coming up on the next slide here. But I can send you a list, but I can just give you the names since it's just 3. It's the Franklin County Community Development Corporation in Massachusetts, the it's the Eastern Shore Entrepreneurship Center in Maryland, and the State University of New York at Cobleskill in New York, obviously. So those are 3 centers, and they are, to be honest, just getting up and running because it's been a challenge to meet all the requirements, get the programs in place. And so in terms of what programs they're offering, I don't know off the top of my head the exact specifics of every single award, but these centers are in general providing a wide range of services. So basically, I would say they're all providing the vast majority of services that they are allowed to provide. They may have some specialties in terms of whether they're working with certain types of producers, but in terms of the types of services they're offering, they're not specializing. They're providing a wide variety. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about the kinds of centers that are likely to be competitive in the program. They should be able to offer a lot of different services rather than just one or two.
Great, thanks, Gail. And it looks like that is it for the questions at this time. If any others pop up, I will jump in and let you know.
Okay, that's great. Well, we'll just take a few more minutes then to just wrap up in case anybody wants, kind of last call for questions here. But I just want to thank everybody for attending the webinar today. This is our first time, well, it's the second webinar we've done for this year. We did one last week, but this is our first time doing something like this for the Ag Innovation Center program. And so I'm hoping that you found the information that we provided to be helpful. If you have any additional questions or want to follow up on the information that was presented, please contact us. And I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to move my extra windows on my screen so I can move the slide ahead here. And so here's our contact information. Got the program website up here for you again. And some of you may have had experience with our state offices and some of you may not have. If you have and you're super comfortable working with our state office, feel free to get in touch with the person that you usually work with at your state office, and they'll get in touch with us with any questions if you feel more comfortable doing that. Or if after today you feel like the Ag Innovation Center program isn't the best fit for you, but you're still interested in the other programs we offer, definitely go ahead and contact your state office and they can give you details about other programs and see if we have something else that might fit. Then I've got my contact information and Honey Turner's contact information on the slide. Definitely, I encourage you to send us an email if you have any questions. And if you want to schedule a time to discuss or talk about anything, send me an email. It's easier for me to schedule than it is to try and catch me in between meetings, and then we end up playing phone tag. So just send me an email with your contact information and availability and what you'd like to talk about, and we'll absolutely set up a meeting to walk through some things with you. So that said, I think that's it. Thank you so much for your participation. Taylor, should we stay on the line for just a little bit in case other questions come in, or how would you like to close things out?
Oh, we can sure do that. We can stay on the line for another 5 minutes, and if questions come in, we can certainly discuss those.
Okay, well, why don't we do that? It's 3:15 Eastern time now, so we'll stay on the line till 3:20. And I'll just mute myself so you don't have to listen to my stream of consciousness. But if you have a last minute question that you're desperate to ask before you get off the line, please feel free to type it in and we'll get it answered. Otherwise, we'll close things out at 3:20, and then just watch for the email with the link for the recording and transcript. And thank you all so much for your attendance today.